If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, then you already know the big news. Starting with the second season, the Amazon series will move filming to the UK instead of New Zealand. Is this big news? I'd say it's major since even Elijah Wood reacted to it. His thoughts? Just a facepalm emoji, which I totally disagree with. So let's get the production gossip out of the way, then jump to my huge theory. Sauron will be the main character of the Amazon series. Yes, the Dark Lord indeed, the Great Eye of Fire and so on. Of course, there won't be any Great Eyes of Fire in this series, but anyway, let's see what happens with filming. Just a few days back, Amazon put out a surprising press release. I was on my TiVo looking for some new fantasy series to watch, but I had to put the remote down and jump on Reddit to talk about it. You see, despite filming the first season of the series in New Zealand, the same place where the movies and the Hobbit abominations took place, starting with season 2, all the action will happen in the UK. Obviously, this upsets some people since New Zealand is pretty synonymous with Lord of the Rings, but it makes a lot of sense in context. For one, most of the actors are from the UK, so shooting for a few years in another country is a pretty tall order. Then there's the Delta variant and new lockdowns in New Zealand, so that would also put a damper on things. And third, have you seen Scotland? Like seriously, if you're looking for dramatic landscapes, Scotland can go toe-to-toe with New Zealand every day. Even more, the UK itself is the birthplace of Lord of the Rings, and Hobbiton is heavily inspired by Warwickshire. So as far as locations go, this one seems pretty ideal to me. But let's move on to the heart of things, shall we? I personally think that Sauron will be the main focus of the series, even though the producer said the first season won't have much mention of him, just general world building. This is also supported by the very first image from production, which shows a beautiful elven city and has a huge spoiler in it. If you look properly at the background, you can see two twin trees emitting light. Yes, Amazon went there. Despite the company only having the rights to the second age of Tolkien's works, they included an iconic image from the first age thousands of years before. Those two trees you're seeing are Telperion and Laurelin, which were in Valinor and whose destruction set in motion the events of the second age. This means the producers will probably rely on some flashbacks, just like the movies did, to show a short history of Middle-earth and the planet Arda before the events of the show. Those two trees were also destroyed by Sauron's captain, the original big bad Melkor/Morgoth, so we might catch a glimpse of him as well. This will all work out to create the background for Sauron. He's the one we should all keep an eye on, and here's why. First of all, if you read the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, you know by now that Sauron is by far the most interesting villain. Whereas Morgoth was just a Lucifer type, just pure evil bent on dominance, Sauron in his various incarnations had a lot more range. He was first a henchman to Morgoth, but once that dude got out of the way, he started taking over Middle-earth in a lot of creative ways. Me, I always saw Sauron as a Littlefinger type from Game of Thrones, an opportunist for whom chaos was a ladder. And just as Littlefinger kept you glued to the screen, so can Sauron.
Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder.
Focusing on Sauron will also give the series a chance to keep faithful to the books without disturbing the lore. As you notice in the books, the second age is the least developed of all the ages, with a lot less epic material than the first age. Where the first age had the creation of the world, a big bad villain, and amazing stories like Beren and Luthien or Children of Húrin, the second age mostly focused on the building and the eventual corruption of Númenor, the great kingdom of men. So, first age is all about elves doing great deeds and fighting the big bad Morgoth. Then, the second age is mostly about men doing bad deeds, and all because of Sauron, the Deceiver, Morgoth's former lieutenant. In case anyone who only saw the Lord of the Rings movies wanders here, I'm gonna keep things light and keep calling Sauron by this name, and not the ones from the previous books like Gorthar or Anatar. Well, I'd be inclined to call him Anatar because that's his disguise in the second age, and I think that's the name the producers will use in the series. So yeah, my prediction is that Anatar/Sauron will be the main character. We also know from the producers that Galadriel, who we know and love from the movies, will be heavily featured, and some might guess that she's the main character. I hard disagree, and for one simple reason. Galadriel, as old as she is, isn't actually a big part of the Silmarillion book. She was written in the Lord of the Rings books as the oldest and most powerful elf around, then Tolkien went back to the Silmarillion and kept adding references to her, just to flesh her out. Despite all of this, overall Galadriel mostly does nothing. She appears all through the ages as a mention, always connected with a strong character, but until Lord of the Rings, she mostly does not interact with main plots. To focus the series on Galadriel would mean inventing a lot of events, which would be incredibly difficult to integrate in the lore. So I think the producers will stay away from that. Since the Tolkien estate is reportedly very happy with the series so far, and the Tolkien estate is also incredibly obsessed with accuracy, I'm positive that the series didn't invent things just to give Galadriel something to do. So that leads us to Sauron. Since this is a series that spans a couple of thousand years, they would need a main character, or a mainstay, that could live for a long time. That excludes men, who only live for a couple of hundred years at most. And since the source material is pretty light on the actions of individual elves, they're out too. That leaves us Sauron, whose character arc and longevity has exactly what it takes to carry a series and not have it be just a collection of separate stories. In the First Age, Sauron followed Morgoth's lead and mostly tortured everyone, until he got smacked down by Beren and Luthien. After Morgoth was defeated, Sauron begged for mercy but was too afraid to stand trial for his crimes, so he went and hid in Middle-earth. And that brings us to the Second Age. Sauron spends a few hundred years in hiding, slowly corrupting men in the south and east and gathering his energy to conquer the west, where the kingdom of elves and men just relaxed and thrived. To conquer them, he doesn't just gather an army like in Lord of the Rings. Instead, he disguises himself into an angelic being and befriends them. Slowly and surely, he befriends both elves and men until he makes those evil rings and people figure out he's actually Sauron. You've seen all that in the Lord of the Rings prologue, so you know this. What you probably haven't seen is what follows after. A huge war between Sauron and the elves happens, where Sauron wins. Then he is totally defeated by the great army of men from Numenor, their greatest kingdom, and is forced to go once again into hiding and corrupting from afar. He does this for some 100 years, and he does it so effectively, he ends up controlling most of Middle-earth. However, after he declares himself king of Middle-earth, the actual king of Numenor shows up at his door. And instead of putting up a fight, Sauron once again shows why he's the deceiver, and such a great character. Sauron immediately surrenders and starts charming the Numenorian king. In just a few years, he goes from prisoner of war to the most trusted advisor to the king, and from that position convinces men to go to war against the gods in the west. Their goal? Try and win immortality from the gods, a gift that was reserved only for the elves. It's these machinations and political twists and turns that make the Second Age such a cinematic part of Tolkien's work, and Sauron such a good choice for a main character. Basically, by following him, the series producers have on their hands a new Game of Thrones. Well, a Game of Thrones before it went off the rails, let's hope. Since the Lord of the Rings series will only launch in September 2022, that leaves us a lot of time to speculate. I plan on spending that time with my TiVo Stream 4K, which connects to all streaming apps and finds me good stuff to watch. I'll also probably dust off the books each and every time some news about the series shows up, because I just can't wait any longer. How about you? What do you think about my theory? Will Sauron be the main character in Lord of the Rings? What else would you like to see in the series? Let's talk in the comments, and if you haven't already, do hit like and subscribe to my channel. It keeps the lights on and lets me bring you more of this. Catch you later.